people file in and join, but I want to welcome you all to our first BUF meeting of 2021. I'm excited to see you all here. And I first want to just acknowledge things that happened Wednesday and just to tell you how much I appreciate you all joining here today and hope you were able to take some time to process everything as we continue to process it in the days, weeks, and years to come. So thank you all for joining today. And we are going to have, I hope, a great discussion about BUF and our future and learn a little bit about what's happened in the past with Boston Urban Forest Coalition. So today we have Andrew Petit de Mange here. He's a park professional and a national resource manager, and his work centers around removing the divide between people and nature through involving volunteers and young people in restoration work, particularly in urban areas. He's been at the National Park Service for much of the past 10 years, and most of that time was at the Boston Harbor Islands National State Park, focusing on growing partnerships between the Park Service and Boston neighborhoods. And he's now working with Partnerships Wild and Scenic Rivers in Massachusetts and Connecticut, managing coalitions to protect greenways along the rivers. So he's here today to discuss his master's thesis, which he completed at Tufts University and got his master's in urban and environmental planning. So his thesis was about the Boston Urban Forest Coalition and analyzing that public and private partnership. So we're really excited to have him here today to speak with us about that and then lead a discussion on how that may affect our work in the future. And so before he gets started, feel free during his presentation to throw questions in the chat and hopefully we can get to them and we'll monitor that. And then if you feel like you need to interject real quick and ask a clarifying question or something, you can feel free to do that, but then we'll have questions and discussion at the end as well. So whenever you're ready, Andrew.
Thanks, Natalie. Good morning, everybody, and thanks, David and Natalie for inviting me here to speak. It's really exciting to see this enthusiasm in support of urban forest in Boston again, and it's great seeing the chat as names popped in and filled in. How many folks are representing a lot of the organizations that were part of the Boston Urban Forest Coalition in the past, and I imagine some of you were actually involved in it. I think before, let me pull up my, I'm going to share my screen in just a moment now. Okay. Is everyone able to see that? Great. Okay. Shift some things out of my way. There we go. And like Natalie said, I may not be able to see the chat, but feel free to chat there, and she can bring things up, or if people raise their hands in Zoom, go ahead and do that. No need to feel like you need to wait. We have more kind of a complete question session maybe at the end, but if something feels pressing, certainly bring it up. Before we get moving along with the presentation, I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. I think it's important that organizations and meetings do these at the beginning. So if you would allow me to read this. We're meeting today from a variety of places that are the ancestral homelands of many indigenous communities, including the Massachusetts, Wampanoag, and Nipmuc, and others from across the continent. These lands were not ceded, they were stolen. Many people were harmed, most significantly indigenous people and enslaved African people. We acknowledge this sad history and bear responsibility to work towards healing. We are grateful to the people who stewarded these places for millennia prior to colonization and who do so still today. We're hopeful that through our work, we might learn to be good stewards of this place and good neighbors to others as we work together for the well-being of all people and places. Thanks. So why am I here? As Natalie mentioned, back when I was in school at Tufts, I was in the urban environmental planning program, and I worked on a thesis mostly in 2015, and I focused on the Boston Urban Forest Coalition as a case study of public-private partnerships. So I was aiming to answer a couple of primary questions. How do public-private partnerships work? how do they work in Boston, and how can they be used to expand urban tree canopy. So as we move forward in the presentation, I'll kind of be addressing those and kind of highlighting some of what I learned, basically the takeaways from the research. It's been a number of years now, so if some of you have better recollections of some of the history of these things, which I'm sure some of you do, don't be bashful, and I won't be harmed if anyone feels the need to correct me if I've misspoken. Before we go further, what was Boston Urban Forest Coalition and Grow Boston Greener? So I'm going to have Natalie help me out here. She created a little survey for us all to take through Zoom that will help us identify kind of who's in the room who has familiarity with these, with the organization and the program. So Natalie, if you want to take it away, and if everyone wants to just take just a quick moment to answer the Zoom survey that's coming through.
Yeah, David, can you try? For some reason, it's not working for me.
Up, people see it there. So there are 3 questions. Okay, we have about 75% people voted. I'll give people another minute or two, another 10 seconds to vote. Interesting results here. All right, so here we are.
Right. So it looks like many of you are familiar with Boston Urban Forest Coalition. A few were involved, which is great. And I'll look to you to kind of help clarify things. And then, and about half had heard, a little more than half had heard of Grow Boston Greener. It's good. Close that out. All right, is everyone able to see my screen again? So I'm going to stop sharing just for a moment so we can talk to each other. So for those of you that are familiar with Grow Boston Greener or Boston Urban Forest Coalition, what do you recall? Maybe just a couple of quick thoughts, maybe from 2 or 3 folks.
The goal of 100,000 trees by 2020.
Hey, Sarah. I remember working with the Menino administration and the curious intricacies of that.
I'll add one more. Having representatives of the city at various levels and the state and advocacy groups all sitting down, figuring out how they were going to do this.
And good times. There were some good times.
Anybody else want to have a recollection?
Honestly, I don't recall much. Are you going to recap?
I am going to do a quick recap, yeah. So I'll just jump into that then. So this is, this screen here is obviously a very, grand oversimplification. But Boston Urban Forest Coalition was this kind of collaboration that banded together to maximize tree planting in the city. It is aimed at using these these agencies that you see here from Urban Ecology Institute, Department of Conservation Direct, City Parks, Forest Service, Boston Natural Areas Network, New Urban Mechanics, Franklin Park Coalition, and Our Arboretum were the primary partners. And they were trying to kind of boost each other's efforts to expand tree canopy, put more trees in the ground. And they were just a presence advocating for trees in the city for a number of years. They were, the interviews that I did with the folks involved kind of reflect some of what you said. There were a lot of successes and a lot of, I think most people spoke really highly of how things went, but it eventually kind of fizzled out. And it's exciting to hear that Boston Urban Forest Friends is trying to rethink how something new might kind of stand on the shoulders of those that came before, and not necessarily replicate what they're doing, but kind of propel something forward. The mechanism by which they did that was primarily this program that was kind of part of the Mayor Menino's Greener Boston program. It was called Grow Boston Greener. It was primarily mini grants that could go to neighborhood organizations, nonprofits to help plant trees, give tree giveaways in the spring and the fall, and then street tree planting that the city was doing itself. It was never funded kind of at the level that I think folks had hoped, and as towards the end of the Menino administration, it was turned over to Boston Natural Areas Network, who led it as just a tree giveaway for a little while. Is there anything else that, I mean, this is the kind of very simplified version. There's more detail that can be discussed, but is there anything, and obviously like Sarah, you mentioned the goal for the Grow Boston Greener was 100,000 trees between 2007 and 2020. So we're here, or we're a year late. We're not there yet. That's okay. That's okay. There's a lot of other good things that have been happening. But any other reflections before I move on?
Yeah, I'll add one more. Stop me if I get too long or too often. But since you asked, I think it became apparent. John, add in if I'm misremembering. Before the end of that time period, it became apparent that 100,000 was out of the realm of possibility. And I think they revised it towards a percent goal that might have been 30% canopy. Does that sound right?
Yeah, there was a lot of discussion about the difference between, because the work was based on doing an analysis of urban tree canopy. And obviously the canopy does not necessarily correspond to whips being planted. I mean, over time they do, but you couldn't just, in the same way like tree ordinances where you take down some specimen tree that's just huge, and then you say, oh, we're going to plant one little, 1 inch diameter whips or something to replace it. It's not the same. So I think there was a little back and forth about how do we maintain and grow the canopy versus just a number of how many trees can you plant. When you get into a number of how many trees can you plant, you need to do kind of like an India thing where you're planting 1 billion trees or whatever. But when you're in the city, I think what's really important is the canopy coverage itself. And so I think there was a growing awareness as the program went on, but unfortunately for different reasons, which I'm sure we'll get into, things sort of fell apart as it went along. And we never really went too much further into figuring out how do we keep that canopy there, which is the end game, really.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing that. That is what was revealed to me through talking with folks and finding resources that I could find when I was doing this work. And yeah, it was revised to more similar, something more like a percentage. And yeah, you'll see later, it's not just Boston, but many places kind of realize that the tree count is, planting X number of trees is not necessarily always the best way of going about it. So over here. So I think it's important to kind of celebrate, what was going on and look at what Boston's doing right now. There's the existing tree canopy is substantial for a major city. It is not perfect, but it's robust and with the interest of folks, it is growing. It kind of fits in spurts. Boston Urban Forest Coalition and Grow Boston Greener both planted thousands of trees. Those programs did plant thousands of trees. The exact number couldn't quite be accounted for in my research and those folks I talked to. There's a variety of different numbers, but it was definitely in the thousands. Speak for the Trees is doing a great job over the past few years to really bring a coalition together, build a framework to really kind of set a foundation for something new to happen. And to learn from what happened in the past and to envision something new for the future for Boston's trees and Boston communities. And community engagement centered on trees is really creating a lot of momentum for this across the city. So it's really, I think, an exciting time. And it's a sign, I can't tell how many of us are on the call today, but it's a sign of the resilience and kind of those looking to do this work. So I think it's a really promising one. So a lot of what the work that I did, this thesis kind of revealed was kind of like the characteristics that kind of build a strong partnership. You know, it's kind of hard for anyone organization or agency or city government to do it all by themselves. And so partnerships typically emerge and to differing degrees of success. And I just want to kind of highlight those things that worked in Boston and elsewhere that can be looked to again for the Boston Urban Forest Range as they kind of, if you all kind of think about what you might do as the next step. So successful partnerships. I'll go through each of these a little bit more in depth. And I think many of you as advocates and tree professionals and folks engaged in this work probably know a lot of this, but I think it's a good thing to kind of look at this all at the same time in the same place and to kind of discuss it. So, we want to engage communities, and that, I mean, it should start within the community. It should really be of the community, really grassroots, and that will ensure kind of longevity and broad support. With regards to leadership, no partner should take up too much space. I think that sharing that is really important, and that as broad a coalition that recognizes different forms of leadership is a healthy way to go. Working capacity is always an issue. No one wants to be stretched too thin. That can really harm the overall outcomes of a partnership. Communication needs to be regular, clear, honest. That really kind of lubricates the entire process of partnering. The idea of funding from different sources, basically that is a universal struggle across many partnerships. And if you have a variety of funders, if one has to step away, another one can step in to fill that gap. And then really the role of city government, it needs to be right-sized. The city government can play and needs to play an important role as this kind of constant, but it needs to be right-sized, and it can really be kind of sustain the effort for the long term. So let's look at these in a little bit more depth. And so engaging neighborhoods, by that I mean that it needs to be genuine engagement. It can't be superficial. It can't be kind of tokenism. That needs to be really looked at early on. People need to feel genuinely engaged, like they are actually contributing to this effort, and that their voices are being heard, and that what they're saying is being either implemented or responded to. Tree champions from neighborhoods are very important. They need to be looked to as pillars of their community and as folks to lean on as allies and advocates. And you'll see at the bottom, I point out empowering renters. The city of Boston, more than 60% of people in the city of Boston rent. Ignoring that constituency and that portion of the population is let's put it this way: it's important to acknowledge them and empower them to be able to speak up and say they have a say in what their city looks like, feels like, and they can change things. Sharing leadership. Leadership can come in a variety of different forms, and it can all be utilized within a partnership if the partnership has a really strong strategy. Some people are the motivators, others are the connectors, the networkers, and others are the organizers to kind of keep things moving forward. It's important to define what all those different types of leadership styles and forms that are needed within a partnership, and to kind of highlight those. Along similar line, when we talk about leaders, it's important that, as people come into a partnership that might have some lofty titles or be from large organizations. For instance, I work for the National Park Service, and working with, at different, scales and working within communities, the role of the federal government can be really tricky and challenging to work at the local level, because it can be kind of the elephant in the room or play kind of be too heavy-handed. So it's really important to kind of realize as people enter into the partnership that even at times those with the titles kind of set those to the side when they're within the partnership, when they're working within the partnership, as a way to kind of balance the power and allow for everyone to have an equal say. And that will lead to that final point there of celebrating all different contributions, because it's the role of the leadership to kind of celebrate little victories and to kind of lift up all different types of contributions that can be made, because they can all be valuable if they fit within the overall vision for a partnership. Capacity, always something that I think is in the back of everyone's mind. Early on in a partnership, the excitement of what might be can often lead to overcommitting, which can lead to burnout. So it's really important that every partner that enters into a partnership really is explicit and honest about what they can do to plant trees, and that these roles and responsibilities don't fall onto the shoulders of any one person or organization, that they're as evenly distributed as possible. That being said, it's not all contributions need to be equal. Some, for instance, that are doing this work as part of their paid job may have greater capacity. Others that are doing this as a volunteer, contributing what time they have, those are not going to be exactly equal, and that's okay. And that needs to be stated as okay. So it's really important to recognize that different types of contributions can help alleviate stress across the partnership and also build a broader coalition. Let's see. Using existing networks, I think oftentimes as new kind of endeavors are sought, then it seems like an opportune time to grow one's network. But I think as the partnership grows out of naturally occurring and pre-existing relationships, then it's kind of a healthier way to grow as opposed to trying to reach and find new partnerships and new networks beyond what might already exist. And of course, sharing resources, which resources can be defined very, very broadly. Communication is often overlooked, at least speaking explicitly about how a partnership might communicate. Communication preferences can really have a big impact. So, kind of standardizing the language that is used, the style, methods, whether it's, emails or Zoom calls or newsletters, and how often, and kind of just having some sort of commonalities and standardization around that is really helpful. And that applies all to internal and external communication, matching the communication type and style and message to different audiences within the broader public is really important. So it is maybe a little extra work, but certainly will help engage folks in a way that meets their needs and brings them on board. Also, regarding communication, better communication builds trust, and if trust can be open and honest and even vulnerable, then it can really allow for many other components of a partnership actually, committing to advocacy and acquiring the tools that it needs and actually putting trees in the ground. The communication around that about what one can and cannot do, or expectations, is really, really important. And then city government. City government isn't really going anywhere, and they just need the right way to be involved. They can be, kind of the backbone of this, of a partnership or any partnership, but the partnership needs to decide what that role for the city is. They often, just like many, they can have different levels of capacity, but generally more capacity than, say, a small nonprofit or an individual volunteer that's part of a partnership. They can do things like, help to be the location for a hire that is kind of the admin and operations staff to help alleviate the stress of the people who are actually working on engaging communities or planting the trees. They can fulfill a lot of roles that might be more challenging for other partners. And I encourage you, you may have seen in that list, the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics, that kind of innovation hub that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. They played a role. It was a little bit unclear to me during the research as to how robust a role they did play, but I think they may be poised to be a really good, strong collaborator in any kind of future tree planting partnership. So beyond this, I just want to just quickly touch on kind of what has worked elsewhere.
Andrew?
Yeah. Yes.
May I interrupt just
please,
long enough to ask a question?
Of course, of course.
At the start of your presentation, you emphasized the importance of having neighborhood organizations in prominent roles in the partnership. And you've just spoken to the importance of having the local government involved. There's a fundamental difference between those two groups. The local government tends to be professional politicians and government administrators, and then local organizations tend to be, maybe more impassioned, perhaps not with specific professional expertise. How do you reconcile those two things in leading a partnership?
That's a really good question, Eric. I think the way that I think about that is that and you're right, when you identify the kind of the passion comes out of the neighborhoods, and then the kind of the bureaucratic operation of the city or district, there's a gap there. I think the neighborhood level, if there's enough enthusiasm, can work with city councilors and can work with, can be the advocates, can be the kind of the activists that people in government typically are not supposed to or allowed to be. So bringing, kind of working with the smallest scale of government that they can be in contact with, I think is key. And I think that highlighting the successes that a community organization can do on their own to the city and demonstrate that it's something that has value across the city, I think can be helpful as well. There's, I think what needs to be done oftentimes with leadership at different levels, whether it's within an organization or within the city government, it needs to come from the people to build the confidence in a elected official to take that risk, to do something bold like that. So I think there's it's a matter of pushing and building up at the same time. So challenging them to take the risk along with those neighborhood organizations. So maybe it's piloting it in a really strong neighborhood that has strong organization that is ready, that's poised to do something like tree planting, and something like a Boston Urban Forest Friends highlighting that, demonstrating that as an example to the city. And as we move on, though, I'd like to hear what others think about this, because that's how I see it. I think there's probably 100 or more other ways of doing that too, and of thinking about that. So yeah, if anybody feels they want to bring that up right now, and I'm happy to incorporate that into the conversation.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I don't know if this fits exactly into what you're talking about, but one of the things that's been on my mind a lot is the city creating the urban forest plan and hiring consultants. And I am not getting any information, despite asking, as to what the role of the community is going to be in that. The people who've been doing this work for years in the neighborhoods of Boston, and where is our seat at the table there? And to me, that's a perfect example of where, government is not in sync with neighborhood.
Yeah, I think that's I having kind of moved on from this work specifically, I just recently was made aware of that plan coming together by David and Natalie in conversations I've had. So they might be able to speak to it better than I can. But yeah, that is a pretty significant disconnect. My thoughts when I first heard of it was that Speak for the Trees or other partners like Boston Urban Forest Friends should probably be prepared to be the ones when they, if there's not any engagement right now from the city around developing the plan, then ready with as soon as it hits the streets for public comment to really have something put together. But that sometimes feels a little late.
And not just that we're not all the same. I mean,
right.
Each group has a different constituency, and maybe some of the stuff we all have ultimately the same goals, but our constituent groups are different, and
Right.
and the kind of work we're doing and the way we approach it are different. So to say that one of these many organizations should be at the table, that doesn't fly with me. You know what I mean? It means to be looking at who are all the organizations. This is a plan for the city of Boston. Who are the organizations within the city of Boston that are doing this work? Who should be at the table?
Yeah.
So Pat, there's a comment here from Charlotte Fleetwood, who I believe is an employee at the city, who just said, rest assured that the Parks Department has every intention of having the plan be community driven. I will say that, that from my conversations with the city, they are keenly aware of the issues you're raising. And I think, hopefully the process will be responsive to what you're saying. And I think it's going to be an interesting process. And I'm glad you're raising that issue now and flagging it because we all have our work cut out in front of us to make sure that it happens in a way that allows or actually carves out that space. I shouldn't say allow, but it's intentional about those invitations and those.
Well, and as an example, I've tried to get in touch with, can't remember the woman's name now, several times.
Maggie Owens?
It might have been. It's been a month or more, but I had several communications with her and kept getting, yeah, soon, soon, soon. Yet you seem to be having communication. So who are you having communications with? I'm just.
And I suggest you and I speak about this a different time.
That would be good.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk to you.
Because who do they choose to speak to is an interesting question as well. And I think if we're going to work together, we need to sort of be communicating with each other about that. I think it's really important if this is really going to be a collaboration that we know who's speaking with who and how do we make sure that we're all moving forward in the same way and all have equal access. I guess that's where I'm coming from with it.
Yeah, I'll call you. I'll call you later today.
Right, but I think it's something that we don't have to talk about it now, but I think it's an important issue for the whole group to think about. How does Dorchester or Mattapan or Rosendale or Hyde Park or the South End or East Boston feel like they have the same equal access as an umbrella organization does? So, yeah. So, okay, that'd be great, David, to talk later.
Yeah, thank you, Patricia. That's a really, really important point to make. So maybe we can bring that discussion back to the surface in some form or another for everyone in just a moment. I'll be wrapping up in just a second. So just want to highlight a couple other places where there's been some success in planting a lot of trees. Probably many of you are familiar with the Million Trees New York City and City Plants from Los Angeles. These are different places that were operating at different times. This is not prescription for Boston. They were also imperfect in themselves, but they did achieve some success. So the keys around New York City was that they had major corporate donors that kept that thing moving forward. They gave a lot of autonomy that the organization that was doing the tree planting, the program, gave a lot of autonomy to the neighborhood level, kind of based on implementation plans, based on kind of guiding documents. But the city's neighborhood, had a lot of freedom to kind of tailor what they were doing to meet the needs of that neighborhood. And they did a lot of advocacy to protect existing canopy, which is crucial. Oftentimes in a lot of cities, there's as much tree removal as planting based on development or changes in transportation infrastructure and things like that. In Los Angeles, the planting was happening in many departments, not just the Parks Department. So diversifying that within city government is important. The fundraising team was based out of the mayor's office, which allowed for, I think, some greater pressure and some accountability by active citizens to keep that fundraising moving, even though it kind of had a bit of independence from the mayor themselves. And as was mentioned early in the meeting here, the Million Trees goal was abandoned as it was kind of seen as a distraction. And And I think that is kind of been an experience across a lot of tree planting programs. I kind of want to go back to the idea of partnering and how being intentional about that really matters. It's important to define all different aspects of the partnership early, to check in about them often, to really set a tone. Building that trust early, and by something like as simple as setting one small goal for, say, the Boston Urban Forest Friends to do and to accomplish and succeed at, can really build some rapport, camaraderie, and trust between all the partners. And instead of diving into the massive long-term goal. And then evaluation. I think that looking at evaluating, how tree planting is going, how canopy expansion is going is important, but also looking at how is the partnership working? How is, what adjustments need to be made? Are we, is the partnership communicating well? Is it operating well? Is it functioning? Are people feel supported? And it's more than just the metric of looking at trees in the ground. And to that end, I kind of at the end here just wanted you to think of what Boston Urban Forest Friends might be as more of an orchestra, where there's a lot of different players. And then maybe this gets at what you're saying, Patricia, that there's many different voices that have different perspectives and different needs, all interested in expanding tree canopy. So whether it's, everyone kind of, to play on that orchestra metaphor, there's different instruments with different parts, different volumes. And I think all of them kind of make the whole. So I think thinking about that in the way that a partnership might plant trees in Boston is similar. That kind of full success can't be seen without all these different voices at different places and times, and coordinated together to kind of find that success. But I think that, hearing about this momentum and being invited to speak today kind of makes me feel encouraged and hopeful for the future of Boston's trees. So I guess the question to move into the discussion is, what are the next steps for Boston Urban Forest Friends? And I'm going to mostly turn the conversation over to David and Natalie, but I definitely wanted to be part of it as well. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and definitely invite some folks to think about that or speak up about what they think might be the next steps.
Well, thank you so much, Andrew, for that presentation. It was really awesome to hear about all the work you did and everything you learned. So I just want to open up the floor for questions, or if anyone has any discussion questions they would like to raise, or anyone from the Boston Urban Forest Coalition, if they have anything to add as well.
One thing I'd say, as someone I was at the Urban Ecology Institute when we were finishing up the original street tree inventory and then the urban tree canopy mapping, and using that to guide the beginning of the what became Grow Boston Greener, and then worked on coordinating some of that, the program development at the time. And definitely to play off the orchestra metaphor, BUFC really was sort of the Rolling Stones. It was a group of people who were very close together, really having a good time, and we clicked. I mean, we all went out drinking together afterwards. We were working crazy hours, working way over what we should have been doing, and everything that you just mentioned in terms of being very intentional, clearly setting what the parameters are, all of that was not really done appropriately. And it relied on a really strong relationship. And I will call out Eric Seaborn from the DCR, who provided funding and leadership and, just being a really great guy. And Leif Fixon, who was working at the city, who really was able to deal with the bureaucracy of the city and help us to actually get things accomplished. That those two really helped, along with Sherry Brokoff, who was sort of the nonprofit whisperer. She was able to get people in line. And so that was, to go back to the Rolling Stones, that was the Mick Keith and I don't know, Bill Watts or something, Charlie Watts. the group, but eventually people ended up overdosing in bathtubs, and things sort of went off the rails as we went forward. And a lot of that had to do with the with exactly what you described, being very clear and intentional about what you're doing, having the right goals. I think the difference between a tree, how many tree goal versus canopy cover, is an important one. It's less organizational and more technical. But on the organizational side, being clear of the financial commitment. And somebody in the chat had asked about like maintenance and things like that, and what didn't work. And one of the things that was really clear is that there was a desire on the part of some folks who were having to raise the money for this, that they wanted to see this being, how much does a tree cost? If I go into Home Depot, I see what a red maple costs. Okay, so if I want 1 million of those, I take that $25.99, multiply it by 1 million. There, that's what the budget is. And not thinking at all that there's people involved in this, that there's programs, that there's outreach, that there's communication, like formal communications, all of this stuff that goes into it. And there was a desire to just sort of lowball it on the political side, because this was not so much an urban forest plan, but it was more of, it was window dressing. It was, look, I'm very green. And there needs to be a better commitment. I think there seems to be much more of a commitment, but I would definitely echo, I think Patricia had mentioned some concerns or whatever. Those things are real. And maybe the tip that we have in terms of Eric's question, working community groups with the city. And when you talk about the city, think of it in terms of, there's the people who are very concerned about the politics and the images of things. And then there are people who are actually, they're out there doing their work, and they want to do this because it's what they studied. Someone like Greg Mossman is someone who's been doing this for years as a tree warden. He wants to see a healthy tree canopy, but he's working within reality of city government and how things work in the city of Boston. So identifying folks like that who can help you get things done, and unfortunately, they're not the ones in charge of the money. But figuring out how you play those two levels of government in the city, I think, is critical. And some of that thinking might be colored by the fact that we were operating during a Menino administration, which had been going on for decades. Now, and especially in light of the last 24 hours, we're in a moment of flux. There are lots of changes happening, some of them great, some of them weird. Hopefully we can take advantage of that. And the advice that you've given in this presentation here, I think, helps provide a footing for Speak for the Trees and others here in this meeting to lay that groundwork.
Well, John, I wish I had spoken to you about 6 years ago. That really helped kind of fill in some color in some gaps there. And one thing that I think I didn't mention, and I know I see a couple of hands raised, I'm going to stop talking, but yeah, I think that, whatever, what Boston Urban Forest Coalition looked like at day one and at the end of when they kind of disbanded were different things. People kind of came and left, different personalities came and left, and different organizations came and left. And there was a succession plan that I was told about, but it was unclear that it was really implemented. So I think having, being really explicit about things like that whoever's there at the beginning may not all be there at the end, is going to be really important to kind of sustaining that. And what happens if somebody has to leave, because there's a lot of reasons. I mean, people don't stay in jobs for 30 years. So it's important to identify that and say that it's all right for that to happen. So I'll let Natalie moderate who's coming up next. I'm not sure if it was Sarah or Laura or Bill.
Thanks, John, for that. And we'll go with Sarah next. And then we'll get to everyone else who has their hand raised.
Hi, thanks. I'll be brief. I just wanted to point out that in one of the early slides, you talked about tree giveaways versus grants. I forget what all the choices were, but in a follow-up to how much of a role the city plays or what the partners played, I lived through various of those chapters, and I live on the Arborway in JP, which I only mention because we were a recipient of 15 trees in what I thought was the highest capacity time of the program when they had, John, remember Gretchen Folk? You didn't just get a grant or a tree given to you, you got Gretchen and a truck and actual trees that were a bigger size that had been nurtured at the Southwest Corridor Park. And you got the neighborhood to turn out and everyone planted a tree and they felt invested and they got educated and trained. Like it wasn't just someone handing you a check saying, go to Home Depot and buy a tree. So I thought that was kind of illuminating in terms of what the ideal might be for something like this. And I really appreciate it as the program changed hands from UEI to Leslie to BNAN. It really did try to evolve and meet the changing needs, but I don't think anything quite compared to having a person. Earthworks, I think, co-hosted, or it was a partnership. That's all from me. I'll be quiet now.
Thanks, Sarah, for that. We'll go next with Bill.
Thank you. Bill Labick with HISET Foundation. And Andrew, very fascinating presentation. I took a lot of photographs of slides because a lot of your findings are very interesting. One in particular I just wanted to comment on is the city government playing the backbone role in a partnership. I'm very curious about that because in the partnerships that I've been involved with over time, people feel that having state government or city government, not so much city government, but say town, be involved in a partnership. And in our case, because it's regional, maybe that's the whole reason why they're not, but not to have a state agency or government in particular, because the dance or the perspective can change with administrations and whole initiatives can be just sloughed off. When we found that if you're going to invest over, say, like a decade, better to have a coalition of a couple of core NGO partners or even a regional funder to play that kind of backbone role at a very minimal level, but like keeper of the flame, then that allows kind of political cover for all the federal agencies, state and local. They can participate without it being, official or anything like that. But anyway, just curious about that and why we're not seeing like a group of NGOs play the backbone role. That's
a really great comment. I think I put that in there because the literature, basically the academic literature, says that if the government can, if that role can be like really tightly defined and I think the way you put it is better, as less of backbone and more the keeper of the flame kind of role. That actually is how it should be. But you're right. I mean, the political winds can shift quickly, and so it's I guess defining what the value of a program around tree planting might be if it is housed more or less, administered outside of the government, but with a tightly defined role for government. And if the goals are defined as something that are broadly appreciated and seen as essential as part of kind of city infrastructure, then you might be able to kind of mitigate some of those shifts politically. But it's really hard. I experienced that working at the federal level and working with local communities. We're a little bit, because we're kind of, we're a little bit more steady than say local government because the mission kind of stays the same for a major agency, but it is, politically things can shift, as we all know, majorly. So yeah, it's a really tricky dance, and the partnership should feel confident and to define what the city's role is as opposed to the other way around, and to limit that if need be, and maybe eliminate it if that's needed. I don't think it needs to be hard and fast, but it has to play a role.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go next with Lara.
Hi, Lara Corrales from Tree Eastie. Couple things that I was just thinking about, and this is sort of just to put out there, and if anyone has comments, feel free, but I feel that with presumably a new mayor coming in soon, we have an opportunity to maybe shift some things up with the city. And I don't know, I'm not super privy on how the different roles work within government. And this is all sort of new terrain for me. But, you know, a few of the things that we've run into with Tree Eastie is Bill Basnerson, who heads up the group, has been really great about being able to get money. But we have a very hard time spending it because of just a lot of the bureaucracy with, you know, what we have to do and how we have to go through parks, and there's union issues and there's various things. So we feel that to some extent we're constrained on what we can do, even though the will is there and we've got funding. And it's just a matter of, okay, well, now what? So I think that's super important. I think also there needs to be a reevaluation of the contracts with the landscaping companies who plant the trees, because they're getting paid big bucks to maintain the trees, which they're not doing. I think as well that there needs to be stronger protections from developers. And I believe, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that it's the mayor who appoints the members of the ZBA. And I think it would be very useful to have people on the ZBA that can kind of have concerns about the environment and the tree canopy, and maybe hold developers to account for, you know, every time they try to remove a street tree or an old growth heritage tree on even on private property, there should be some constraints on that. And I also think, and this is just sort of my opinion, but Boston is a huge city. I used to live in Cambridge, which is much smaller and, you know, sort of just a very compact, manageable size. Boston is huge, and every neighborhood is super, super different. Especially when it comes to tree canopy. I mean, East Boston, we're on the very, very low end compared to like Hyde Park or Jamaica Plain, which is a lot greener. And I think it would be useful in the structure of the Parks Department. And again, I don't know if this is within the mayor's power to change this, but something for whatever incoming administration we have, it would be useful for them to maybe listen to some of these ideas, because my thought is that every neighborhood should have its own dedicated arborist, because every neighborhood has different issues and concerns. And also then you have somebody with feet on the ground who can keep track of, okay, are these trees being watered? Are they being pruned? Are they being maintained? And if we're paying these companies huge money to maintain the trees, why isn't it happening? And to really just, you know, hold them to account. So anybody has any thoughts, chime in.
Yes, I'd like to piggyback on that. I have several thoughts. You said a lot of really important things. So number one, when you're talking about hiring companies and getting arborists and all that, I agree we need an arborist for each neighborhood, and each neighborhood is so different. But the city is also now in the process of trying to create a green workforce. You know, there was people may have been on the city council hearing recently where they were asking us to talk about that. And the idea being that we need to start training and hiring Boston residents to do this work, rather than hiring companies, or training Boston residents and then having companies commit to hiring them. So that's one really critical point that has to stay in our thoughts as we go through thinking about this. There are so many neighborhoods in Boston who are hit hardest by COVID, who have the least tree canopy, people who need jobs, particularly people of color, low-income people. They need to be part of whatever plan gets put in place. And the city is, you know, at least Councillor Bach is, and I'm sure Michelle Wu are both, you know, would both be on board with that. The other thing is, like you were saying about each neighborhood is so different. Hyde Park may have a lot of tree canopy, but there's a tremendous amount of education that's needed. We lost, so most of the tree canopy we lost in the last 5 years is because of people cutting trees down in their yards. And I'm hoping the urban forest plan sets up a process where you can't just cut a tree in your yard without permission. But there are so many people coming, and some people from other cultures where it's considered a status symbol to have no greenery in your yard and no trees, just stone and pavement and stone walls. And so that's the other piece of it. It's not just about getting the money to do the tree planting and care. It's about educating people about why it's critical to have trees in public places and on people's property, no matter what your income. So those are my thoughts.
I just wanted to recognize that it's 12 o'clock now, and I wanted to thank Andrew. In case, Andrew, you have to go, the room will stay open for continued conversation as long as people want to hang around. I don't want to shortchange anything, but just wanted to take a moment to thank Andrew for not only wonderful research, but a wonderful presentation to frame a really important topic with the urban forest plan starting to take shape in one way or another. I think these conversations need to happen more frequently. Thank you for raising all the points people here have raised. We'll continue meeting as the Boston Urban Forest Friends. I want to thank Natalie for coordinating these meetings. Please reach out to her if you have suggestions on future topics. And I know there are people who had their hands up for a while, but I just wanted to take a moment to thank Andrew at the noon time.
Thank you, David. I really do appreciate this. I actually do need to skip out. My wife and I have to switch trading off childcare. So I apologize for that. But this has been really uplifting. And hearing the comments and questions, I think this group has a lot of knowledge and expertise and know-how to really move this forward. So I'm excited. I hope that as you all move along, I can kind of be popping in and out of the conversation from time to time. If you want to reach out to me, my personal email address will be in the slides that I share. I'll share my presentation with you all. As I mentioned a couple of times, I do work for the National Park Service. Not here today representing that because it's not within the purview of my job. But there could be opportunities within Boston to eventually partner with National Park Service as they kind of are looking to change their role in the city and be better neighbors to neighborhoods in the city. And it could involve tree planting and things like that. So yeah, keep your eyes, ears open for all those things. And I really appreciate the time and look forward to what Boston Urban Forest Friends becomes. So thanks, all. Continue the conversation.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
Take care.
Big thank you to Andrew.
Okay, so we have two last people with their hands up. So we'll go with Lee, if you have a point to make.
Yeah, sure. So I just acknowledging too, I also have to go to another meeting in a second. So I might share this and then have to, I'm again, just grateful also that this is being recorded so that any one of us can come back and connect to this at any point in time. So thank you for making sure that was the case. So yeah, again, I'm just connecting here from Somerville Climate Coalition in Somerville and more specific to Trees and Green Space, Green and Open Somerville, which is a member of that larger coalition. A couple of things. I think I had put in a question about funding and acknowledging that Andrew's not here, but just thinking about the whys of how funding was insufficient. And I was curious, thinking about then versus now and how having more information and the importance of coming back over and over again with that new information to reshape a plan or to reevaluate relationships and how they're involved. I think when I was talking about with funding, I was thinking about in terms of things like gas leaks. Like we have a whole gas leaks map now that just didn't exist so long ago. So I'm just, I guess, curious about that, and how that will play a role in the shaping of the coalition going forward here. Also in terms of communication, things around translation, interpretation, kind of how that will, I don't know how that looked in the years between 2007 and 2013. Even in, I feel like, attending meetings now, it's seriously lacking in those areas. So how that will shape up. And I guess just a point to raise as well, maybe connecting back to what Patricia and Eric, you also reminded me of, just like how often we frame things as if the city and community are two separate entities. And so that's like, as opposed to all of us having access to resources and relationships, depending on where we sit at any point in time and how that can shift at any point in time. And so, I don't know, I guess I just think about for myself and how any one of us our responsibility to, in terms of the culture of the spaces that we're coming together in, and ways that we can, I don't know, maybe not make an assumption, make assumptions as to what, because again, I definitely experienced as a community member, at least here in Somerville, the city staffers often waving away an inquiry that's been sent in or sharing of something that's expertise, either from professional background or lived experience, because someone's a community member as opposed to city staff. And so, yeah, I guess just any ways that when someone is coming forward to one of us, whether it's a city staffer is talking to me about something as a community member or vice versa, that we can be curious and grateful for what's coming to us. But that's just a cultural thing. I mean, that's a culture thing too. That's why I think I lifted up here, because I feel like that's just something we all need to work on ourselves, and then also in the spaces that we're creating together. And I don't know what that looks like for this coalition, but it's just something that continues to be there for me, I guess, wherever I am. So, but just, yeah, we're not separate, we're together. So yeah, anyways, just thank you for receiving that. And thank you to everybody here for the work that you're doing.
Yeah, that's definitely something to think about and explore as we continue doing this work. So last, Eric, if you have something to say.
Yes, I'd like to make 2 points. In Andrew's first response to me, he pointed out that the work of a coalition, an urban forestry coalition, needs to be relevant to what the city government is working on. And he also pointed out in his presentation that, in effect, that most quote unquote million tree campaigns throughout the country have failed. New York and to the extent that LA has succeeded are the 2 outliers. And which is to say that city governments have priorities around different programs. In the case of Boston, there's a climate resiliency plan and a parks plan and a neighborhoods plan. And better that an urban forestry goal should be connected to helping the city meet those priorities than setting a somewhat arbitrary goal of planting 1 million trees or getting to 35% canopy because that's a round number. So that's my first point. And it kind of connects to the second point in that a couple times now, the topic has come up, what is the relationship between nonprofit and community participants and the city government in a coalition, like BUF. And I would suggest that it's symbiotic in that the local government is responsible for setting the policies and administering the programs, and frankly has jurisdiction over both the public property as well as local ordinances. But and so in that sense, a coalition needs the local government's support. But in many respects, a coalition like this can also do things that the local government can't. It can bring resources to the table. It can also, advocate and demonstrate support. So, I'm trying to think of a relevant example. The one that comes to mind is from the city of Detroit and their sustainability action plan advocating that the city help residents reduce energy costs. Well, one of the best ways to do that is to plant trees on the south and west side of your homes. And so we connected that priority that the government articulated to improving the tree canopy.
So Eric,
Yeah.
we don't have to leave the fine Commonwealth of Massachusetts to see programs like that. We have a program.
No,
like that.
it's just, kind of a
Yeah.
brain fart, I
No,
can't think of
no.
a
But I just
local
wanna-
example.
I want to, Eric's in Detroit, and I want to call out Julie and Molly from Massachusetts Conservation Recreation, DCR, and the Greening the Gateway Cities program that they do that has some of those. So we have models, I think, like Eric mentioned, in other cities, but we don't have to look that far here in Massachusetts to think about how Boston might, adapt that or use that. So Eric, you always are a wealth of information and knowledge. And for those of you who don't know Eric, he's our partner over at American Forests, based out of DC, a wonderful organization, and has been incubating and supporting a lot of our work here in Boston. Any final thoughts here before we wrap things up?
I have a thought, and again, it's not meant to be critical, just more something for us to think about, is that there's not a lot of diversity in this group from what I see. And there's not a lot of neighborhood participation, a few people I see, but I feel like that's a problem. Certainly not a lot of neighborhood participation from the southwest part of the city. So I don't know what we can do about that. I mean, I know what we can do about that, but I feel like it's something we should think about. And I'm still a little unclear about who should be in this membership group. But I feel like if we want to represent all of Boston and the different neighborhoods, I think we need to make a plan for how to make that happen.
So I want to be clear that this is not a membership group. It's an open invitation.
Well,
that's the first, yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
But
But I do agree with you that we have to be more intentional in our outreach, and we are at Speak for the Trees doing in the process of continuing to do that. And I welcome, other ways that we can expand this table. I totally agree.
I mean, think going through the neighborhood associations is a really great way to do it. At least in Hyde Park, there's many neighborhood associations that cover the whole of Hyde Park, and they're very diverse, and that we can talk, David, more about that as well. I think that'd be a great way to start to include more people who I know care about this stuff a lot.
I agree. I appreciate that, Pat. I really do.
Great.
Well, Natalie, you want to close us out?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you all so much for coming. And it was, I think, a great first meeting of the year. And hopefully throughout this year, we can continue figuring out all of our places within this and have these great discussions. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.